Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday, a new week. Hopefully you rested over the weekend and are ready for yet another week of at-home schooling. Well, for some of you. Hopefully some of you are having in-person classes and are having some face-to-face connection, face-to-face communication. I miss that. Um, so are there any questions before I move to the lecture? A heads up, time is kind of running fast, it's picking up, and I just checked the schedule for the course, and it turns out we have an exam on March 8th, which is a Monday, and there is only it's 2 weeks from now. So the exam is going to be on anatomy and physiology. So if you haven't it, well, I guess if you're here, there's good chance that you reviewed. But for those of you who watch it later, if you haven't reviewed the prior lectures, this is the time to kind of review them and or watch them and start preparing for the exam. Okay,
I have a quick question, Professor.
go ahead, Madeline.
So is transcription and translation of DNA also in that?
No. It's going to be focused only on anatomy and physiology. So
Okay.
transcription, translation will be on the final exam, but not on the upcoming exam.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Oh, Lindy is asking, where can I find the old lectures? You can find them on on our section of the web courses. You go to modules, and in the modules, there are links to the previously recorded lectures published, as well as the notes for the lectures. So this is where you would find the list. So go to web courses, enter our section, and in the left vertical tab, select the modules tab.
I have a quick
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Brandy.
Okay, so just from last lecture in the participation assignment, touch and taste is from the same receptor. Is that correct? The mechanoreceptor?
No, taste is chemoreceptor. I'm going to cover it today. So for the
Okay.
previous participation assignment, I gave everybody a point or 2 points for the last question because I didn't get to it during the lecture. So you should see that no matter what you answered for the third question on the previous participation assignment, you will get the credit for it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and the questions are rolling in. Good. So Kathleen asks, will the exam be on lockdown browser? And the answer to that is no, the exam will not be on the lockdown browser. However, the question that you will have 45 seconds to answer the question. I looked over the logs from the previous exam, and it seems like it's plenty of time to answer the question because all of the questions are multiple choice, true or false, or a drop down menu, kind of select from a drop down list. So it's going to be fine. And please do not leave your browser, your Chrome or whatever browser thing you're using. Do not leave the exam tab next time that you take the exam. Disable all the notifications on your laptops or computers. So close all the other web pages that may throw pop-up windows. So do that to prevent the log showing that you left the browser. So Mackenzie asked, when is the grade for participation assignment on Friday going to get changed? It's already changed. It was changed automatically. No matter what answer you gave, it should give you credit for that question. And if Mackenzie, if what I'm saying conflicts with what you're seeing on web courses, please shoot me an email and let's get to the bottom of this. Lauren is asking, will there be a study guide for the exam? Yes, there will be. Ansley is going to work on posting the study guide, and the study guide will be ready next week, early next week.
Yeah. From now on, when we say study guide, because I see a few questions about what that entails, it'll just be like the last exam where we put out like a review or like a list of topics for you guys to go over. I don't know as far as like in-class review if Dr. H has anything planned. But the review that we put out will just be like a list of topics.
Yep. Great. Any other last minute questions before I move on? Will using Google Translate during the exam be considered cheating? If you leave the tab, uh, yep, there is no way for me to check whether you are using Google Translate uh, or or looking up the answer to the exam. So yeah, hopefully you will know all the terms in this course. There shouldn't be anything new when you take the exam. So if you come across the term during preparing for a study guide, for instance, during going over study guides, is Sarah, I am addressing your question now. When you're going over the study guide, if there's any unfamiliar terms that you come across in the lecture or in the question itself, in the study guide topic itself, make sure to look that beforehand and review those terms beforehand, what they mean in your language. Because again, when you leave the tab with the exam, there is no way for me to know whether you're looking up the answers or looking at the Google Translate. In the lockdown browser, you wouldn't be able even to do that. You wouldn't be able to leave the lockdown browser. So treat the exam as if you're taking it as in a lockdown browser. Unfortunately, we cannot use it because 40 people could not make it work on their computers, and I don't want to discriminate against those people. Okay. All right. With this, let me switch the screens here and start with the lecture. Okay, so a couple of reminders as usual. We have the quiz due today. Quiz 4 is due today, and quiz 5 opens tomorrow or midnight tonight. And it will be due this week. This is going to be a busy week with 2 quizzes due. One due today, and another one due on Friday. This Friday, upcoming Friday, February 26th. And there is a participation assignment posted, which is due today. I think it's posted. It might be unpublished, but let me check after the lecture if it's published or not. Okay, so first I'm going to finish going over the couple of topics that I did not cover last time. So on Friday, a reminder, on Friday we covered the nervous system and the senses. And I went over the nervous system and the neurons and how they communicate with each other, but I didn't get to the actual senses. It didn't get to describing how we sense the world and how are the messages passed to the nervous system. So I kind of went over in a rush the receptors on skin. We again the skin senses the touch, and it senses the touch with mechanoreceptors. The receptors in the skin can also sense the temperature, and the receptors that sense the temperature are called thermoreceptors, and the receptors that sense the touch are called mechanoreceptors. So receptors are located at various depths in the skin, and some of them the receptors that are located closer to the surface of the skin, they can sense the light touch, and receptors in the deeper in the skin, they can sense the deep pressure, just deep pressure. And we have receptors surrounding the hair follicles, and this is the reason why we can sense when something touches our hair. For instance, when a wind is blowing and we kind of, when we're outside and the wind is blowing, it kind of it may move the hair on our hands, on our arms, and we sense that. Or when somebody doesn't touch the skin but only touches the hair on the skin, we can still feel that, and that is because we have the mechanoreceptors surrounding the hair follicles. And this is also the reason why it hurts when we pull the hair out. Okay. So sensing smell and taste is detecting chemicals. So the receptors that can sense the taste and smell are called chemoreceptors because they do not respond to the physical stimuli, they respond to the chemical stimuli. So the molecules in the food or the molecules in the smell, they kind of enter the receptor and fit to particular receptors like a key to a keyhole, okay? And we can send, there are a lot of various receptors in our nose and on our tongue, and we can distinguish a lot of smells and a lot of tastes because we have a lot of different receptors. So the chemoreceptors in the nose and tongue respond to molecules dissolved in the watery solution, such as saliva or the moist lining of a nasal passage. Sense of taste begins in the taste buds, and the taste buds are these little pimples located on our tongue. So our tongue surface is covered with bumps called papillae. Inside them are the taste buds. So we use taste buds to detect molecules at close range when we put them in our mouths. So a bit of a reminder from the previous slide, we need to have some moisture in the mouth in order to taste, because if there's no water to dissolve whatever taste, whatever molecule will give the taste, either you will not taste it. So usually we have saliva in our mouth, which is sufficient to taste something. But if you have severe dry mouth, it's very likely that you will not taste things as well as when you don't have dry mouth or take a sip of water. So I thought it would be a fun fact to share with you, but during the previous time I taught the course, somebody asked me about how do we taste salt? Like what is responsible for salt? Do we taste, so salt, a molecule of salt is a sodium chloride. It's an atom of sodium and an atom of chlorine joined together. So when these two atoms or this molecule contacts with water, comes into contact with water or saliva, it dissolves in the water or it dissolves in the saliva. So the molecule of sodium chloride becomes an ion, positively charged atom of sodium and negatively charged atom of chlorine. So what do we taste? Do we taste sodium? Do we taste chlorine? Or do we taste both? And the answer to that is we taste sodium. The sodium tastes really good to us, and it tastes, well, let's say salty, and we kind of crave salty foods. We are kind of genetically programmed to crave salty and fatty foods. So the sodium, the positively charged sodium atoms are actually what we taste on our tongue, and we don't taste the chlorine part. Now, vision depends on light sensitive cells. The sense of vision detects light, and specialized cells in the eye send signals to the brain, which interprets those signals as an image. So when a light hits the eye, when an image like hits the, well, it's light. The light hits the eye, it goes through the pupil to the retina, and the special photoreceptors located in the retina, they sense the light and the color of whatever image hits our eyes. So there are two the types of receptors that are responsible for sensing light, for our vision, are called rods and cones. So two types of photoreceptors, rods and cones. And rods are responsible for detecting low light, and the cones are responsible for detecting color. So rods detect light, and cones detect color. If there is some sort of mutation or disease of the retina that affects the rods or the receptors, photoreceptor shapes that detect low light, then a person will not see as well during the night, in the nighttime, or during like low light conditions. And if there is an issue with photoreceptors of cone shape, which are responsible for detecting color, then the person will not distinguish colors very well. So color blindness, there's various types of color blindnesses, but all of the color blindnesses essentially are caused by some defect in the photoreceptors that are cone shaped. Okay, Ansley's covering the questions. Christine is asking, so is it possible for people to only need glasses at night? Good question. I am not sure. Technically, it could be possible, but from the top of my head, I'm having trouble identifying like how correcting What glasses do, they correct the angle that the light hits the retina. So if the person lacks rods, or there's a defect with the rods, I don't see how correcting the angle by which the light would hit the retina would help, unless I'm really delayed in like in keeping up with progress, and there's kind of other glasses rather.
I
Like,
mean, what I was gonna say is like to see better, you need more light. So like you can't just put a lens over your eye and that is gonna spontaneously create more light in which you can see better. Because that's the ultimate factor is whether or not there's enough light in which you can see.
right. That's a very reasonable response. Thank you.
I have a quick question, Professor.
Yeah, go ahead. Madeline.
Why are men more affected by color blindness than women are?
Excellent question. That has to do with different alleles and how with the different genotypes and how they are inherited. So women are affected by color blindness much less, as you said, if at all, and that is because the women do not inherit this kind of allele for the color blindness, color blindness, and if they do, it's not expressed. There is another type of allele that is more dominant than that kind of overshadows the effect of the color blindness allele. William says sexual genetic disorder. I would say it's more accurate way to describe it would be inheritance. Like, I don't want to say it. Like, I don't want to say what I'm thinking because I'm not 100% sure whether if that's what happens. I'm just gonna blurt it out, but I'm going to go back and check myself later, and we'll get back to you on this. So what I wanted to blurt out is the color blindness allele might be located on the 23rd X chromosome, but I am not sure. So I'm going to double check and update you guys on that. Okay. Okay, moving on, unless there are other questions or comments. Okay, so the bottom line here is all of the photoreceptors are located on the retina in the back of the eye here. So we need the pupil, we need the lens, we need the iris to get to intake the image, but the image is not sensed there. The image is sensed all the way in the back of our eye on the retina, and two kinds of photoreceptors sense the image: the rods, which detect light, and the cones, which detect color. And from these from these photoreceptors, the signal travels with the nerves, with the sensory nerves to the brain, over the sensory nerves to the brain. Okay, we have a sense of hearing, and the hearing begins in the ears. The sound is basically a pressure wave that travels across space. This pressure wave is caught by our ears, which have the shape that promotes the funneling of the sound pressure wave. To capture it, like if the pressure wave hits over here, it will be like funneled to the auditory canal, and sometimes pressure wave can hit directly in the auditory canal directly, which is when we hear things better. And the pressure wave kind of vibrates the eardrum, and the vibrations of the eardrum, this is the zoomed in image of the eardrum and what happens next. So the vibrations of the eardrum are passed to the three small bones, the three smallest bones in the human body, within the middle ear. So the vibrations of the eardrum are passed to the hammer. Then the vibrations from the hammer are passed to the second bone, the anvil, and the vibrations in the anvil are passed to the third smallest bone in the human body, called stirrup. Now, the vibrations from the stirrup are passed to this oval window and to the inner ear, where liquid is kind of vibrates, and the sensory and the hair cells inside the cochlea, they pick it up and pass these signals, pass these vibrations, or rather interpretations of these pass the vibrations, not into brain interprets things, but the vibrations from the inner from the cochlea, picked up by the hair cells in the cochlea, they are passed to the brain via the auditory nerves. William comments, those bone names are epic. Well, those bone names are gonna, whenever the human was gonna, whenever people discovered what was inside human body, they kind of went along what they knew, like that they were naming things like the things looked, and at that time, this bone looked like a stirrup, which it does. This bone looked like a hammer by its function. It's kind of exactly what it does. And hammer bangs on an anvil, and well, this bone does not quite look like an anvil, but it's more of a functional name. And we've got Ansley covering the questions. Great. Okay. Madeline has another question. Why would the ear connect to the nasal cavity? Ooh, the question of why is a difficult one, Madeline, although a good one. Uh, I don't have an answer for the question why. It just is. But the consequence of that, like that the ear is connected to the nasal cavity, the unfortunate consequence of this phenomenon is that when you get a cold, or when you get like a bacterial infection in your nose, it can spread to the ear and cause earache and ear pain, or you feel pressure in your ears when you have a cold. You may have pressure in your ears when you have a cold. So this connection is, you can feel it whenever you get sick, but as to why it exists, I unfortunately do not have an answer to that. Any questions before I move on to the endocrine system? Okay, endocrine system is going to be next. So the endocrine system consists of glands and hormones that are released by glands. The hormones have powerful effects. They affect our mood, they affect our emotions, they affect our feelings, as well as developmental patterns. So we've all been through this, and we've all been through the teenage years, and the person goes through puberty during the teenage years, and during the teenage years we can really observe the power of the hormones, because the body changes, and these changes in the body are affected by the increased concentrations of hormones that are released by various glands. The hormone composition changes, and well, yeah, quantity changes. In animals, the hormones do affect metamorphosis. For instance, the hormones affect the way caterpillar turns into butterfly, right? So if you didn't know that caterpillar and butterfly was the same thing, or the same species, then you might not even connect the two, because a butterfly has wings and it looks completely different from the swarm crawling around that is caterpillar. So like nervous system, the endocrine system is body's communication tool. And nervous system is fast. The nerve electrochemical signals travel very fast across neurons. But the endocrine systems, it's somewhat slower. So the response, whenever the endocrine system is stimulated, the response is not felt as fast. It's a bit delayed. And it takes a bit of time for the response to subside once the stimulus that triggered the response in the first place goes away. So for instance, The hormone that I'm sure the effect of which you've all felt is adrenaline. This is the hormone that increases your heart rate, that makes your pupils dilated to and kind of tenses your muscles. The adrenaline is a hormone that is responsible for a fight or flight response. So whenever you're scared, this is the hormone that helps you either fight off the danger or run away from the danger. So the muscles tense up because they're prepared to fight or flight. They're prepared to work. The heart rate increases to get your metabolism going faster, to get you more energy for whatever comes next, and the pupils dilate to allow you to see more, to catch more light onto your retina, to kind of increase the efficiency of your vision. And I'm going to cover it later on. So the adrenaline is just one of the hormones, the effect of which you feel kind of fast. But note that you first may see the danger, but you may not, it may take you some time. It can take you like a minute to feel the effects of adrenaline. For instance, you're walking in the, well, maybe not a minute, not adrenaline, it's pretty fast, it's 30 seconds or so. You're walking in the woods and you see a bear, and like 30 seconds, you kind of take a couple of seconds to assess the situation. Oh, it is a bear, look at that. And it's moving in this direction, and it's about 30 feet away. And at this point, which is about 30 seconds later, your heart starts pumping, you start sweating, you start, your muscles tense up, and you run away from the bear, let's say, and you're safe, but your heart doesn't stop pumping immediately after. You have to it takes you some time. It can take you an hour to come back to normal, to stop feeling nervous, to stop feeling tense. And sometimes, if you're stressed chronically, if you experience these rushes of adrenaline very frequently, then it may become less and less easy for you to return to the state of calm, because of the conditioning of the system that you're constantly stressed. So the endocrine system consists of glands and hormones, and the endocrine gland itself consists of cells that produce and secrete hormones into the bloodstream. And the blood carries the secretions throughout the body. And a hormone itself, the definition for the hormone, it is a biochemical that travels in the bloodstream and alters the metabolism of one or more cells. So hormones interact with the receptors in target cells, and they trigger responses in target cells. So we have in the image here, we have the cells of endocrine glands that are producing the hormones, and the hormones are these little dots here. The hormones then travel in the bloodstream, and as you probably know, the blood goes everywhere. We have even the smallest capillaries in every bit of our bodies that receive hormones as well. So not all of the cells in the body, though, are susceptible to the hormones. Some cells are susceptible, some cells are not susceptible, and what determines the susceptibility of a cell to an effect of a hormone is a protein, a special kind of protein that is embedded in a cell's membrane. So if a cell has the particular receptor protein, the cell will respond to whatever hormone wants it to do. If the cell does not have the receptor protein, a special receptor protein that corresponds to a particular hormone, the hormone will just bounce from the cell and travel elsewhere in the bloodstream, hoping to stumble upon the cell that does have this receptor protein. Of course, I'm personalizing the hormone. It's not doing that. It doesn't think at all. So if a cell does have a receptor protein, the hormone binds to it, and the cell then produces the response that the hormone programs it to do. Also, this one cell does not necessarily have a unique single receptor protein. It can have various receptor proteins. So one cell can respond to multiple hormones. So one cell can respond to adrenaline, and the same cell can respond to what other hormone? Estrogen or progesterone. Like one unique cell can respond to multiple hormones. The hormones can be classified in terms of solubility. So there are two types of hormones, water soluble and lipid soluble. Water soluble hormones cannot pass through the membrane, but lipids through the membrane of the target cells, but the lipid soluble hormones can. So what happens with the water soluble hormone, it travels around the bloodstream, and whenever it finds the cell with the protein, it binds to the receptors on the surface of the cell. So the target protein will be in the cell membrane. The target protein for the water soluble hormone will be in the cell protein, and the reason for that is water soluble stuff cannot pass through the cell membrane by itself. It needs some help from the proteins. Now the lipid soluble hormones, remember the small lipid molecules can pass through the cell membrane just via diffusion. They don't need any auxiliary proteins to help them do that. So the lipid soluble hormone does just that. So it travels in the bloodstream, and whenever it finds some cell, it just passes through the cell, and it passes through the outer membrane and through the nuclear membrane into the nucleus. Okay, and the lipid soluble hormones have their affect the proteins inside the nucleus, whereas the water soluble hormones they trigger the response by binding to a protein on the cell membrane. So a bit different. So water soluble hormones activate other proteins inside the cell. And this is just a zoomed in image from the previous slide, so nothing really new apart from this bit here. So water soluble hormone, it binds to the receptor protein, and then this binding triggers a response inside the cell. So we have a second messenger, abstract second messenger molecule activated, and this second messenger molecule then produces the cell response. So maybe the hormone wants a cell to secrete, I don't know what, some chemical that is needed by the body. Anyway, it's not important. It's useful to keep it kind of abstract at this point. But the important thing to remember is that water soluble hormone does not enter inside the cell. It just binds to the receptor protein, and this binding itself triggers the cell response. Now, the lipid soluble hormones, on the other hand, they pass through the outer cell membrane of this and the nuclear membrane, and gets inside the nucleus where DNA is, okay, where DNA and various proteins resides. And the proteins that we've seen so far are like RNA polymerase. Polymerase is a protein, is an enzyme, and enzyme's a protein that builds the messenger RNA from a DNA. Now, the hormone, the lipid soluble hormone, it binds to a receptor protein, but this receptor protein is floating inside the nucleus. And this, by binding to this receptor protein, it affects how messenger RNA are synthesized. So it can trigger the synthesis of messenger RNA, or it can inhibit the synthesis of the messenger RNA. And as a result, you may get increased synthesis of a particular protein or decreased synthesis of a particular protein. Because remember, if you don't have messenger RNA, you will not have a particular protein, because messenger RNA exits the nucleus, goes to the ribosome, and the ribosome gives the instructions to the ribosome what kind of protein to synthesize. But if there is no particular mRNA, then you will not synthesize any proteins at all. For instance, I'll give an example, which I'm sure all of you can relate. So insulin is a protein, okay? And if if there is a signal, like if there's a particular hormone that that would trigger the synthesis of insulin, I'm going way backwards on this. Anyway, insulin is a hormone. If there is messenger RNA that would provide the instructions for the synthesis of insulin, insulin will be synthesized. But if there is no messenger RNA that would provide the synthesis of the insulin, there will be no insulin in the body. Okay, so messenger RNA is important. So, and these lipid soluble hormones, they affect messenger RNA by binding to some target protein that participate in the synthesis of the messenger RNA. Any questions about water-soluble hormones, lipid-soluble hormones, or definitions that I've covered so far? Do you have an example for each? Oh, good point, Christine. So for water-soluble hormones, the example for the of those would be thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and insulin. Insulin is a water soluble hormone. Now for the lipid soluble hormones, those are, well, sex hormones are all lipid soluble. Estrogen, androgen, progesterone are lipid soluble hormones. Oh, another thing that is important to understand is the water soluble hormones. They produce a faster response they yield a faster response from a cell compared to lipid soluble hormones. And why is that? Because there's less steps, comparatively less steps involved. Water-soluble hormone binds to a receptor protein in the membrane, and then almost immediately a cell reacts in a particular way programmed by the hormone. But with lipid-soluble hormone, they produce slower responses. Their responses are slower because the lipid-soluble hormone has to enter through the membranes, and then messenger RNA affect the synthesis of the messenger RNA, and then the messenger RNA would have to exit or not exit and bind to the ribosome, and then a cell would respond. So there's more steps involved in a cell response to a lipid-soluble hormone than to the water-soluble hormone. So the responses are slower. The cell responses to lipid-soluble hormones are much slower compared to the water-soluble hormones. Okay, so if insulin affects the cell response is kind of instantaneous. But if estrogen affects a cell response is much slower. Any other questions or requests regarding the material I've covered so far? Christine, are we good with examples? Did you catch the examples that I gave for the hormones?
Yes, thank you.
No questions? Okay. Okay, so hormones are released by many endocrine glands, and this picture summarizes what endocrine glands we have and what do they do. So I'm gonna go from top down, and the first item on the list is hypothalamus, and it produces hormones that stimulate or inhibit the hormone from the pituitary gland, and pituitary gland is located just below the hypothalamus. Okay. So they're kind of connected. Hypothalamus regulates the hormones released from the pituitary, and pituitary, shown in this little orange pea-sized thing here, it produces the hormones that affect and target tissues directly or stimulate other endocrine glands. And I will cover in more detail what does pituitary do. It does a lot of stuff. It regulates a lot of other glands, the pituitary gland. Now, pineal gland is located in the back here, and the pineal gland is very useful to us, and because it helps regulate our sleep. It produces melatonin, which helps regulate the sleep-wake cycles. And I'm sure you're familiar with melatonin because there is a lot of supplements that contain melatonin these days, and that these supplements are advertised to help you sleep or help you let's say shift from one time zone to another. So like let's say you're traveling from here to Europe, and like people's I wouldn't say doctors advise it because I've never heard a doctor advise it, but these supplements are advertised as, you know, you can take them uh, for during the evening time of of your new target time zone, and it will help you shift the schedule faster. Personally, I haven't never tried it, and I don't know. Unless the doctor advises it, I wouldn't do it. The next on the list is the thyroid gland, which releases thyroid hormones, and these thyroid hormones regulate metabolism. They regulate the heart. They help regulate the heart rate. They help regulate the sugar metabolism, and so on. The thyroid gland is connected with the parathyroid glands, and para means near. So parathyroid glands, or behind thyroid, they're located behind the thyroid gland. They secrete parathyroid hormone, which helps regulate blood calcium content. So um, sometimes the doctors will test your calcium levels, and if the calcium levels are high, they're gonna start testing the hormones associated with the parathyroid glands. The adrenal glands, they are located above the kidneys, and as the name suggests, those are the glands that produce adrenaline. They and other hormones that regulate the kidney function and contribute to the body's stress response. So it's kind of easy to remember. The adrenal glands, they secrete adrenaline, among other things. We have pancreas, which is a part of the digestive system, and it releases hormones that regulate blood glucose level. So the hormone, the kind of signature hormone associated with the pancreas, is the insulin. Okay, I'm gonna look at the questions. I see there is, should we know each of these glands? Christine, yes, it is helpful to know each of these glands and what they produce. It will be important for the exam. There's more slides though about this. So this is an overview slide, but there's going to be plenty of more slides giving examples of what hormones are secreted by each gland and what do those hormones do. Okay, so pancreas, part of the digestive system, produces insulin. If a person here is a woman will have ovaries, and the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and they help like mediate the monthly changes in the uterine lining and promote secondary sex characteristics. Like estrogen regulates the body fat content, and it regulates the size of the mammary glands, and so on. And if in men, men have testes that produce testosterone, and this testosterone promotes sperm maturation, as well as secondary sex characteristics. So men generally have more hair, they have like broad shoulders, more muscles, thicker bones, and that is one of the few effects of the testosterone. All right, so the first stop here is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus adjusts the hormone production. Okay, what do we have with time? 6 more minutes. Okay, the hypothalamus adjusts hormone production. The feedback systems coordinated by the hypothalamus respond to current hormone levels, keeping hormones at steady levels in the blood. So this is the illustration of the negative feedback here. And the specific example that is given is the thyroid hormone concentration. So if thyroid hormone concentration is normal, nothing really happens. But if thyroid hormone concentration is too high, then hypothalamus senses the hormone levels and increases the TRH secretion. And TRH, although it's not, I'm not going to ask you to know what it stands for, but it stands for thyrotropin releasing hormone. So what it does then is the anterior pituitary decreases the TSH secretion. So what we have here is the hypothalamus over here and anterior pituitary over here. So the pituitary gland, the whole pituitary gland, is located just below the hypothalamus, and we have the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary part. So the anterior pituitary, it secretes the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, and if the TSH or thyroid hormone concentration is too high, then thyroid stimulating hormone concentration goes down, because as the name suggests, thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the production of the thyroid hormone. So if the thyroid hormone is too high, concentration is too high, we want less of the TSH hormone. We want to stimulate the thyroid gland less. We want less thyroid hormone. So if there's less TSH and less TRH, then the secretion of the thyroid hormone by the thyroid gland goes down, and the thyroid hormone concentration comes down to normal levels. And conversely, if the thyroid hormone concentration is too low, then hypothalamus senses the hormone level and increases the TRH secretion. And again, TRH is thyrotropin releasing hormone. Well, and what it does, the increased TRH secretion, the signal goes to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is stimulated, and it increases more thyroid stimulating hormone. And if there is more thyroid stimulating hormone in the bloodstream, then the thyroid glands will produce more of the thyroid hormone. So if in the beginning the thyroid hormone concentration was too low, after response from the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, and following response from the thyroid gland, the thyroid hormone concentration becomes normal again. Yes, Lauren is asking a question. Is this considered a negative feedback loop? Yes, that is exactly the negative feedback loop, which we touched upon a couple of lectures ago. So it's kind of a thermostat. So the example that I gave before is that of a thermostat. If the temperature is too high, then some response is triggered that will get the temperature to the normal level. And if the temperature is too low, some other response is triggered that will get the temperature back to the normal level. So this is analogous to the temperature and thermostat response. Temperature thermostat heater or air conditioner loop, but with the hormones. And in this particular example, the elements of this response are hypothalamus, which either stimulates the anterior pituitary or inhibits it. Anterior pituitary, which either stimulates thyroid gland or inhibits it, and that's it, basically. And the thyroid gland releases the thyroid hormone. And any other questions about this particular loop here? Okay, so there's two parts of the pituitary gland. We have the hypothalamus is over here, and the pituitary is located right below the hypothalamus. We have the pituitary gland is separated into two parts, or there are two parts to the pituitary glands, the posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary. So I just gave an example which focused on the response of the anterior pituitary, which releases the thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, and it's just one of the hormones that it releases. But right now I want to switch to posterior pituitary and just say what kind of hormones it releases. So the two hormones that are released by posterior pituitary part is the ADH hormone, or anti-diuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Oxytocin, it's probably more familiar to you guys than ADH, because oxytocin is also called it's also the what is called, it's not a happiness hormone, but it makes you feel more attached to people and less stressed. By the way, oxytocin is a hormone that is often released as a result of hugs. Like if you hug a person, the person who is hugged is going to have more oxytocin, and the person is going to feel nicer. Like you feel good if you're full of oxytocin. But also oxytocin, if you have a lot of oxytocin, which people often are the pregnant women sometimes are given oxytocin to stimulate the uteral contractions. So which is quite painful and not happy at all. But oxytocin is generally is a hormone that promotes the developing like human connection and feeling nice. And ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, it stimulates the cells in the kidneys to return water to the bloodstream rather than eliminating water in urine. So kidneys are responsible for filtering our blood and excreting the wastes through urine, through the urinary canal. Okay, so it produces pee basically. Okay, and it is 10:20, so I'm going to pick it up on Wednesday. Any last minute questions from you guys before we end today's session?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
What exactly is the difference between the anterior and posterior pituitary gland?
So both are parts of the pituitary glands, and it's just spatial orientation, like where they are spatially located. Anterior is located literally in the front, and posterior is in the back. They just release different hormones, and that's why they're classified as different parts of the pituitary gland. That and morphology is why they are classified into two different parts. So this whole structure here is I'm going to move up. This whole structure here is the pituitary gland. So hypothalamus in brown, the pituitary gland in gray. Like the whole gray part is the pituitary gland. But it, like morphologically, you can distinguish two parts of the pituitary gland. And it so happens that two parts produce different hormones. So because of these morphological and functional differences, they were separated into anterior and posterior.
Okay, and the anterior part was like the thyroid hormone.
Yeah, thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, the hormone that stimulates thyroid. And posterior, this one, go ahead.
Yeah, posterior is like the ADH and
Oxytocin.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We'll come back to the anterior next time, because anterior does a lot of more stuff than posterior. All right, any other questions? Anel, yes, we covered everything for the participation assignment. Megan asked a similar question. Yes, everything's there for the participation assignment. We covered everything for the participation. All right, guys, see